네, 여러분 안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon.
청명한 가을 하늘이
With
푸르게
clear
펼쳐진
blue
이곳
sky welcoming us
충청남도에서
warmly
탄소
in
중립을
this
위한
Chungcheongnam-do
희망과
province,
혁신적
it is a
변화
true
촉구를
honor
위해
for me to
마련한
be
의미
the
있는
MC
포럼의
of
사회를
this
맡게
meaningful
되어
forum to
진심으로
promote hope
영광입니다.
for carbon neutrality and
저는
innovative change.
언더2연합 아시아태평양 지역 포럼 개막식
My
사회를
name
맡은
is
아나운서
Kim
김희라입니다.
Hira, your
반갑습니다.
MC today for Under2 Coalition Asia Pacific Regional Forum.
1년 전에 제가 이 자리에 섰었는데요.
I was here about a year ago,
행사 전날에 태풍이 몰아쳤습니다.
a day before the
오셨던
conference there
분들은
was a
기억하실
typhoon.
텐데요.
Really
그래서
heavy
행사 진행에 대해서
typhoon.
우려가
I think the ones who
컸었습니다.
have been here
그런데 행사
last year
당일
remember that.
거짓말같이
So I was very concerned
햇살이
about the condition.
비쳤습니다.
But on the
어제도
conference day, there was a
하루 종일
bright
비가
sky
내렸는데
once again coming
오늘도
up.
햇살이 비춰주고
The same
있습니다.
happened this time as well. Yesterday it was rainy, but today we are having a blue sky. This is a conference helped by
이렇게 오늘
the destiny
귀한
and
행사를
the
위해
support
시간을
of the sky.
내주신 내빈 및 관계자
I'd like to
여러분들께
express my
감사의
deepest
말씀을
gratitude for
드리며
everybody who
내빈 한 분 한 분을
attended
소개해
today's
올리겠습니다.
event. Let me introduce
먼저
main guest of
행사의
today's forum.
주최기관인 충청남도
First,
양승조
Governor Yang Seung-jo
도지사십니다.
of Chungnam Province, the host of the event.
네, 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.
Please give him a big round of applause.
언더2연합
Governor Yang is
지역
also the
의장을
co-chair
맡고
of
계십니다.
Under2 Coalition Asia Pacific
다음으로
region.
기후솔루션 김주진
Next,
대표님 자리해 주셨습니다.
we have Kim
큰 박수
Joo-jin,
부탁드립니다.
CEO of Solution for Our Climate, is with us today.
카이스트 녹색성장대학원장 엄지용 교수님
We have Ji Young
반갑습니다.
the head of KAIST Graduate School of Green Growth, with us
충청남도
today.
기후환경국장 이남재 국장님
Now we
자리하셨습니다.
have Nam Jae-lee, Director General of Climate and Environment Bureau of Chungnam Province, with us today.
박상조 원장님께서
We have
함께해 주셨습니다.
Principal
반갑습니다.
Park
큰 박수
Sang-jo, who
부탁드리겠습니다.
is the head of the Chungnam Institute of Industry
네, 또
University
많은
Convergence.
토론자분들께서
We also
온라인으로
have
함께해 주시고 계십니다.
many
오늘
discussants
이
for
자리를
today's panel
함께하는
discussion
모든 분들에게
online.
환영과
I'd
감사의
like to
마음을
welcome
담은
all of you and
박수로
also
그
pay
뜻을
deepest
전해보도록
gratitude with a
하겠습니다.
warm
다 같이 큰
round
박수
of applause.
부탁드리겠습니다.
Please give all the participants a big hand.
네, 아시아 태평양 탄소 중립 경주 Race to Net Zero
Now,
in Asia Pacific.
Let me open the Asia Pacific Carbon Neutrality Race to Net Zero in Asia Pacific Under2 Coalition Asia Pacific Regional Forum.
먼저 개회사와 환영사를
For opening
듣겠습니다.
and welcome remark,
언더2연합 아시아
we
태평양
will
지역
invite
의장님을
the
역임하고
Under2
계신
Coalition Asia
양승조
Pacific
충남
Regional
도지사님을
Co-Chair,
모시겠습니다.
Governor Yang
여러분,
Seung-jo.
큰 박수로 맞아주시기
Please give him a
바랍니다.
big hand. Governor Yang is taking the lead in eco-friendly transition of energy by coal phase out.
예, 여러분 대단히 반갑습니다.
Good afternoon, everyone.
언더2연합 아시아 태평양
I am the co-chair of Under2 Coalition Asia Pacific Region, the governor of Chungcheongnam-do Province, Yang Seung-jo. This is the first forum that I hold as a co-chair of the Under2 Coalition Asia Pacific Region. Although we couldn't bring representatives from various member regions due to the COVID-19, I'm very happy to be able to have you online. And we would like to thank Under2 Coalition, climate group representatives from local governments of Under2 Coalition member states, and everyone with us today. Under2 Coalition is a key to the solidarity and joint efforts of cities around the world to prevent a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global temperature. Since its establishment in 2015, it has been a model for international organization, taking the lead in climate change actions and practices for the future of the planet and its descendants, presenting great direction and leading concrete actions in the face of new challenges. In particular, despite its complex interests presented in the region, the Asia-Pacific region has been working together to create common future for the Earth. Our Pacific region has been highly engaged in manufacturing industry, which also emits a lot of greenhouse gases. It makes us feel more burdened and responsible for carbon neutrality. Nevertheless, all of our member states take this crisis as an opportunity and prepare for a new era before anyone else. We've been working hand in hand towards a greater common goal to prevent global warming despite the difficulties. Through close cooperation and participation, we have acted and practiced more actively, and through joint efforts such as attending general meetings and actively exchanging opinions, we finally elected a regional chair whose seat had been vacant for 5 years until last year. Now we will have to take another leap forward based on this tradition and pride of the Asia-Pacific Regional Forum. This is a time of great change. The world is changing faster than ever. In particular, the pace of climate change is beyond our imagination. It's time to make more desperate efforts toward the joint goal of carbon neutrality and energy transition. We don't have time to hesitate anymore. Only our cooperation and joint efforts will be the strongest vision to prepare for the Earth tomorrow. We hope that all of us in the Asia-Pacific region will cooperate and join forces to solve the challenging tasks of climate change response and energy transition. I hope that we will wisely overcome all the challenges facing our time, our Earth, by sharing strength and wisdom together. Chungcheongnam-do Province will take the lead. As it is a co-chair of the region, we will take greater responsibility and play a more leading role in dealing with all the challenges that have been placed on us. I would like to say that together with the Under-2 Coalition Asia-Pacific Regional Forum, Chungcheongnam-do Province will be a new hope for the Earth's sustainable future, and I hope today's forum will be the starting point. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Governor Yang. Climate change, carbon neutrality, and carbon coal phase out, he showed big passion toward to tackling the issue. Please give him a big round of applause once again.
다음은 축사가 있겠습니다. 멀리 해외에서 오늘의 행사를 응원하고
Next is congratulatory remarks. We do have messages from abroad. And let me introduce to you. First, let's hear from Nicholas Sturgeon, co-chair of the Under-2 Coalition. Please.
I want to send my very best wishes to everyone taking part in this Asia-Pacific Regional Forum. We're now just 7 weeks away from the start of COP26, taking place in my home city of Glasgow. It promises to be the most significant climate summit since Paris in 2015, and it represents the world's best chance, possibly one of our last chances, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. In recent weeks, we've been reminded once again why doing that is so vitally important. The report last month from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was described by the UN Secretary-General as a code red for humanity. The report confirms that global warming is changing the climate and causing extreme weather events in countries around the world. Developing countries, which have, of course, done least to cause the climate crisis, are so often the hardest hit. That is a massive injustice. But as we can increasingly see, no country is protected from the impacts of climate change. If the world doesn't act now, all nations will pay a heavy price. COP26 is therefore absolutely crucial to the future of our planet. I believe that states, regions and devolved governments have a vital role to play in making the summit a success, both in delivering the transition to net zero and in calling for national governments to raise their ambition. And so Scotland is seeking to lead by example. By 2030, we aim to have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 3/4 compared to their 1990 levels. And we've already committed to having net zero emissions by 2045. We're working to ensure that our transition is also a just one, that no communities or individuals are left behind. And we want to learn from and work with governments at all levels across the world. That's why I place so much importance on my role as European co-chair of the Under2 Coalition. It's why Scotland has established the Net Zero Futures Initiative to support and encourage other members of the coalition in setting net zero targets. And it's also, of course, why we welcome an event such as this one. Today's forum is an opportunity to share knowledge and ideas on addressing climate change. It's also a chance for states and regions to demonstrate ambition and make the case for greater international action ahead of COP26. So I wish all of you all the very best for your discussions. I'm grateful to everyone involved in today's event, and I very much look forward to working with all of you in the months ahead as we seek to make COP26 a milestone in tackling the climate crisis.
네, 니콜라스 스터전 언더2연합
Thank you very much.
공동의장님께 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
And let's give our big round of applause.
다음으로는 시울레 지칼랄라 아프리카
Next is
공동의장님의 축사
the
말씀 박수로
congratulatory remark from the
맞이하겠습니다.
Nicolas Sturgeon from Sioules Chikarala, Africa co-chair of the Under2 Coalition.
Continent and KwaZulu-Natal subnational government, a proud member of the Under2 Coalition since 2012, a coalition that is being recognized as one of the international partnerships with the highest potential for emission reduction. I wish to extend a word of sympathy and empathy to countries that have been hit by the current pandemic, the coronavirus. Congratulations are in order for the governments that are carrying out programs to curb further spread of the virus among their citizens and are on their way to recovery. Let me state that we are not going to lose sight of the imminent dangers of the pandemic on human health and the economies. Hence, the precautionary non-pharmaceutical measures are still in place and recommended. KwaZulu-Natal is serving another term as the co-chair representing the African region. In this capacity, we have participated in the international events like the New York Climate Week and the 2020 Mayhem Conference. In these events, we undertook to advance just economic transition and green recovery for our subnational government and African continent. We are one of the beneficiaries of the Climate Footprint Project, which has been supported by the Under2 Coalition. Through this project, our province has as a baseline inventory which assists to identify our highest emitting sectors and make necessary intervention to reduce these emissions. This is a testimony that through the Under2 Coalition, our biggest strength is the ability to work together, even though we may be thousands of miles apart. We are excited about sharing the platform with the Asian Pacific climate leaders as part of the Under2 Coalition. On behalf of the African region, and in particular the province of KwaZulu-Natal, we congratulate the governor of Changnam province on being the new co-chair for the Asian Pacific region. Your province is in good company of California, co-chair for North America, KwaZulu-Natal, co-chair for Africa, Quarantaro, co-chair for Latin America, and Scotland, co-chair for Europe. Our members often come together to share ideas and knowledge, share questions, or work through solutions as a group. In the words of the co-chair, Governor Newsom of California, I quote, "We have an extraordinary amount to learn, each and every one of us, from one another," close quote. I hope Changnam province is already enjoying this pleasant experience. We're looking forward to sharing the best practices based on creating and implementing green policies, advancing for more decisive action, not just at regional level, but from the national governments as the UN Climate Change Conference, the COP26, approaches in 2021 November. Talking of COP26, I hope that everyone has made upward adjustments in their nationally determined contributions as an attempt for to further commit to and advance the 2030 emission reduction targets as well as the 2050 climate change neutrality dream. Our province remains being that of green recovery and just transition, and that is what we have determined up to 2050. It is pleasing to note that the current rate of ambition, commitment, and potential for emission reduction is surpassing the 2021 Global Climate Action from Cities, Regions, and Business report. We're seeing real leadership from states and regions, such as setting out green recovery plans and ambitious emissions commitment. Members of this coalition have enough to benchmark from, given that many of our solutions have to achieve a rate of no more than 1.5 Celsius of global warming already exist and are being developed and deployed by Under2 coalition. The potential to lower emissions is made more possible by some similarities in GDPs among members. Realizing climate neutrality by 2050 will bring greater opportunities, but we know that it will bring challenges too. Such have been witnessed through the current spate of COVID-19. As a country and the province of KwaZulu-Natal, we continue to make strides on climate change, though under circumstances that derail our focus and effort as a result of COVID-19 pandemic and the socio-political uprising, which was widely reported and resulted in some damages to properties and death of people. However, we chose to remain focused, and next 10 years will determine our ability to deliver. On behalf of the African region, KwaZulu-Natal government, my fellow co-chairs, I wish the Asian Pacific Forum 2021 all the best and fruitful deliberations, which can only take the Under2 coalition to great heights. I thank you.
네, 기후중립 행동을 위한 언더2연합의 중요성과 역할에 대해서 잘 말씀해
He talked
주셨습니다.
about the importance of the Under2 coalition for
이어서
realizing climate
기후그룹
neutrality. And
CEO님의
next stop
말씀
is,
들어보겠습니다.
let's meet Helen Clarkson, CEO of Climate Group.
Thank you, Governor Yang, for inviting me to speak here today, and thank you for the positive role Chung Nam has played in the Under2 coalition this year. Your support has been vital in helping us to achieve our goals and in showing others what it means to lead on the climate. Today's conference is important not just for states and regions in Asia Pacific, but for all of us. Every day we're seeing the effect of climate change in our lives, from wildfires, fires to flooding, and time is running out to take meaningful action. And often too, it's those least responsible for climate change and with the least ability to deal with it that feel its effects most severely. That's why we need to build a future that's not just about cutting emissions, but about fairness and equity too, where we support one another in the challenges we face. To meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, we have to empower states and regions everywhere to set net zero emissions targets and develop pathways to achieve them. It's only through this commitment and ambitious actions that we will reach our goals. Our Net Zero Futures project, which launched early this year, has been bringing together states and regions from across the world to explore ways of meeting net zero in ways that leave no one behind. Around 80 states and regions have taken part so far, and 35 members of the Under2 coalition have net zero targets, so we're making real progress. But, as ever, more needs to be done. We want to see states and regions following Chungnam's lead and laying the foundations for a more sustainable future. It's encouraging to see so many people here today united around climate change and looking for the solutions we all need to achieve a world of no more than 1.5 degrees C of warming. You all have a role to play in protecting our planet for future generations in this climate decade, where so much is at stake. States and regions have the power to make things happen where it matters and the potential to bring about real change. With such a powerful collective voice, it's time to lead the way on net zero and inspire national governments to do the same in 2021 and beyond. Governor Yang, thank you, and I wish you every success in today's conference.
It was a message from Helen Clarkson, CEO of Climate Group. Next up, let's meet Tim Ashby, Director of the Under2 Coalition Secretariat.
Hello, I'm Tim Ashby, and I'm here today representing the Under2 Coalition, the states and regions. Under2 is a global coalition bringing together leading state and regional governments from around the world who are committed to cutting emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. Our members now represent 1.3 billion people and represent something like 43% of the world economy. We're guided by 5 co-chairs in our work, and they represent our diverse membership, including, of course, our Asia-Pacific chair, Chungnam Province. I want to congratulate Chungnam on bringing together so many different representatives of government and business here today to shine a light on the most important issue of our time: climate change and how to achieve climate neutrality. The science says that we must cap our emissions at no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade in order to avoid disastrous effects of climate change. That means that to be in with a chance of a sustainable future, we have to halve global emissions in the next decade. At President Biden's climate summit in April, we saw a range of countries commit to new actions to slow down global warming. In the case of South Korea, this meant ending the financing of coal mines overseas, an action that we were pleased to see Chungnam's support for in a statement from the governor, repeating Chungnam's dedication to the phase-out of coal use. To meet net zero by 2050, however, we need to do more. This means looking not just at national governments, but at the whole of society, states and regions, cities, businesses, investors, individuals. More than 20 states and regions have now got net zero emission targets and are making plans to reach them. We hope to announce more soon. The exact plans will depend on the region and where most of their emissions come from. So some will focus on the reducing of transport emissions or emissions from the energy systems. Others might look more closely at reforestation or in the investment in green technology. But we're calling on all our members to commit to net zero emissions, including through the United Nations Race to Zero campaign. The Under2 Coalition, together with the Government of Scotland and Bloomberg Philanthropies, is running a series of events on net zero futures, aimed at helping governments to develop realistic and achievable net zero targets. State and regional governments have a significant role to play in the global effort on climate change. They have unique powers to develop and implement climate laws with effects on air quality, transport, energy and buildings, and they can influence national governments to be more ambitious while encouraging cities and businesses, their public, to do more. Now is the time for governments to step up, to set ambitious targets and take a stand for the climate, together. With Chungnam's leadership, the Under2 Coalition is in a strong position to set the example on global climate action, and this Environment Day, more than ever, it is essential that states and regions lead, and it's in everyone's interest that they do. Thank you.
It was a message of encouragement for the Race to Zero campaign. Thank you. And now let's move on to the message delivered by Jared Blumenfeld, California Secretary for Environmental Protection.
Environmental Protection Agency. And I don't have to tell you, but California, like the rest of the world, is already experiencing very dire impacts of climate change. We're currently managing the environmental and public health threats of extreme heat, drought, and catastrophic wildfires. This year alone, 1.3 million acres of California have burned. The climate crisis requires us to take big, bold steps. It's simply too late for half measures. And the Under2 coalition is an incredibly important vehicle for enabling leadership on climate change and on achieving the aims of the Paris Agreement. As such, it's a real pleasure to provide these virtual open remarks for Chungyang's Asia Pacific Net Zero event. Chungyang and Governor Yang Sung-jo have demonstrated excellent leadership and climate ambition in the past few years by becoming the first Asian member to join the Powering Past Coal Alliance in 2018 and being the first South Korean member to join the Under2 coalition. This has enabled them to lead the way for other states and regions in South Korea to phase out coal. The Asian Pacific Regional Forum and the panel discussion on net zero and energy transition are so important for allowing members to understand the locally and regionally appropriate policies and technologies for getting to zero carbon. As co-chair of the Under2 coalition, Governor Newsom and the entire California team is calling on all state and regional governments to meet this moment and commit to setting and implementing net zero emission targets now to combat the effects of climate change. Ensuring the transition to net zero is both just and equitable is a mainstay of the California approach, and we're eager to partner with other jurisdictions to ensure a common approach to the principles of justice and equity. Collectively showcasing subnational climate leadership and net zero targets in the lead up to and at COP26 this November will be critical to raising global ambition, driving enhanced efforts by national governments under the Paris Agreement, and showing the world what it will take to tackle this existential crisis head on. Thank you, Governor Yang, and my best wishes for the rest of the event.
네. 탈적탄핵일을 선도한 충남 지역과
Thank
양승조
you. It was a message delivered by Team Ashby around Chungnam's efforts and Governor Yang's efforts. The next is
대사님을 영상으로 모셔보겠습니다.
Federico Paella, Ambassador of Italy to South Korea. Please.
Governor Yang, dear participants, as Ambassador of Italy to Korea, I am very proud to participate to this event by sending a video, especially because this year Italy is, together with the UK, co-hosting the 26th UN Conference on Climate Change. More specifically, Italy will host the pre-COP and the Youth COP in Milan, 27 September, 2nd of October 2021, which are preparatory meetings for the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. The pre-COP event is dedicated to the negotiations among the state parties on the final document, conclusions, of the actual COP26, which will take place a month later. Italy is among the most committed countries at the international level for what concerns climate action, and it intends to play a pioneering role in combating climate change. Within the EU, Italy has achieved well in advance the climate reduction targets set for 2020. Around 20% of its energy supply comes from renewables, and more than 40% of its electricity consumption is covered by renewables. In the Italian Integrated National Plan for Energy and Climate 2030, approved by the government in December 2019, we have set very ambitious goals. The plan is a fundamental tool that marks the beginning of an important change in our country's energy and environmental policy towards decarbonization. The plan is structured in 5 lines of action, from decarbonization to energy efficiency and security, passing through the development of the internal energy market, research, innovation, and competitiveness. The goal is to create a new energy policy that ensures full environmental, social, and economic sustainability of the national territory and accompanies the transition. 10 are the Italian targets in the plan. Accelerate the path of decarbonization, put citizens and business at the center so that they are protagonists and beneficiaries of the energy transformation. Favor the evolution of the energy system, particularly in the electricity sector, from a centralized to a delocalized one based mainly on renewable sources. adopt measures to improve the capacity of the renewables, continue to guarantee supplies from conventional sources, pursuing the safety and continuous supply, albeit to a lesser extent, promote energy efficiency in all sectors, promote the electrification of consumption, in particular in the civil sector and transport, invest in research and innovation activities, adopt measures and precautions that reduce the potential negative impacts of energy transformation on the environment and territory, continue the process of integrating the national energy system into that of the European Union. For what concerns coal power plants in Italy, the plan establishes that the 8 coal plants in our country will be shut down by 2025. The process is ongoing and implies considerable investments. For example, the construction of gas pipelines to the island of Sardinia, given that the region does not have access to the national gas network, and the electricity interconnection of the island with the mainland. Considerable investment are also required to the private sector. For instance, the company Enel is the Italian main coal power plant operator. It has been working for many years on the project to close its plants. The deadline of 2025 is also expected for Sardinia, where Enel manages one of the 2 coal plants. But in this case, the process is more demanding because of the building of the new energy connection to the mainland. To disconnect the coal power plants from the grid, Enel has planned to build, together with the renewables and batteries, more gas plants to be kept alive for a limited time until there is an ever larger diffusion of photovoltaic and wind sources in the country. To conclude my short address, Italy is committed and working hard for decarbonization by 2025, taking into consideration the bridge solution of gas for a short period of time, increasing them in time further the renewable sources, and responding to the demands of the citizens and the business representatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a message delivered by the Ambassador of Italy to South Korea. Last, Mihail Leifschutter, Ambassador of Germany to South Korea, will deliver congratulatory remark. Please.
Dear Governor Yang Song-jo, distinguished participants, it is my great pleasure to participate in the Under-2 Coalition Asia-Pacific Forum. The 2021 International Conference on Coal Phase-Out and Proactive Response to the Climate Crisis is important. It provides an excellent platform to share experiences and ideas on how to rebuild better and greener and fairer. Today, right now, in this moment, right here, we are in the run-up for net zero in Asia Pacific. As a powerhouse of the global economy and home to more than half of the world's population, the region's climate and sustainable development policies are decisive for the future of the world. The most recent IPCC report from August shows what is at stake. Achieve net zero by mid-century or earlier to safeguard the livelihoods of millions of people and ensure the future of our economy. This level of ambition should be reflected in all NDCs and long-term strategies of national and subnational governments, as well as the private sector. Phasing out coal as the single biggest source of CO2 emissions is the first step towards net zero. A step decision makers must take today. Cheaper, cleaner, and smarter alternatives are already the dominant mainstream in many countries. Renewables and energy efficiency technologies create jobs for people and contribute to an affordable and reliable energy supply. We highly welcome President Moon's pledge to an ambitious revised climate goal 2030 in line with net zero. Setting an ambitious timeline to phase out coal power domestically is a further unparalleled opportunity for Korea to seize a leadership position in advancing global efforts to end coal power emissions. There is no doubt that the transformation of the energy sector away from coal, oil and gas brings with its challenges. But the benefits outweigh the risks by far. Participatory processes can help ensure that tailored and just solutions are developed. People are not afraid of change, like closing a coal mine, as long as they have hopes for a better life. This is exactly what the Under2 coalition stands for: ambition and collaboration. We can only achieve our Paris goals and vision of transforming into an inclusive and innovative society when all levels of government work together during the development and implementation of policies. Local, regional and national actors all have unique insights and capabilities that are needed. For this reason, Germany has been making collaborative climate action a core principle across its national and international climate policy efforts. Yet, the reality is that cities, communities and regions still can and must do more. I believe Chungnam's commitment to phase out coal power is a credible and inspiring example to other countries, regions and cities in Asia-Pacific. There are many other examples where members of the coalition are showing leadership and real impact. Therefore, I congratulate the Under2 coalition on its second anniversary. Dear members of the coalition, you are representatives of people's hope for a better and more sustainable future. You are proof that policy making based on scientific and economic facts is the right way. Keep up this work and let the coalition continue to lead by the example of its ambition for a climate-neutral world. Thank you.
네, 미하엘 라이프인슈트 주한독일 대사님의
Thank you
말씀이셨습니다.
very much.
비록 이 자리에서
Although we
함께하고 있지
cannot be
못하지만
with all the
영상 중에
figures
좋은
with
말씀
us today,
전해주신 7분께
but I'd
큰
like
박수
to express my
부탁드리겠습니다.
deepest gratitude and give them a big hand.
여러분은 지금 아시아 태평양 탄소 중립
You are with
레이스,
us now,
언더2연합
the
아시아
Asia-Pacific
태평양
Race to
지역
Zero
포럼
opening
기망식
ceremony
행사를
for Under2
함께하고
Coalition Asia-Pacific
유튜브
Regional
채널로
Forum.
생중계되고 있으니 많은 관심과
This is
참여
provided as a live
부탁드립니다.
streaming service in YouTube.
계속해서 한국을 넘어 세계에
Now,
계신 분이시죠.
not only in Korea but
제8대
also
UN 사무총장과
in the world, a famous
대한민국
figure,
기후환경회의 위원장님을
His
역임하신
Excellency Ban
반기문
Ki-moon, former
이사장님께서
UN
영상
Secretary
메시지를
General and Chairman
보내주셨습니다.
of National
함께
Council on
보시겠습니다.
Climate and Air Equality, provide us with a congratulatory keynote speech. Let's meet him on the screen. Good afternoon, I am Ban Ki-moon. It's very good to see you here. Thank you for inviting me to the first Under2 Coalition Asia-Pacific Forum. I am very pleased to be able to join you in this meaningful venue to strengthen climate crisis response and save the Earth through cooperation between governments around the world. The world has experienced a very difficult time, especially last year and this year, because of climate change. In particular, coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic, major forest fires in Australia and the US and Europe, heavy rains in China and Western Europe, and heat waves around the world, climate crisis has been getting worse for a month. You can see the headlines about the climate crisis on the newspaper. Before this climate crisis began in earnest, through the Paris Accord in December 2015, we unanimously agreed to keep the average global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius against pre-industrialization level. Taking a step further, the 48th IPCC General Assembly held in 2018 in Incheon, Korea, agreed to work together to limit it to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have to take the climate crisis signals that emerge from all of the world with heavy heart. Various policies must be implemented to ensure that immediate benefits and convenience inconvenience prevents us from let future generation pay the price. To limit the global average temperature increase within 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030, global carbon dioxide emissions must be reduced by at least 45% compared to that of the 2010, and a complete carbon neutrality must be achieved by 2050. There are now 9 years left until 2030. Time is not on our side. Countries around the world must join forces to boldly return the Earth lifetime. This is because the climate crisis is a must-have task for cooperation and solidarity with each other, which is difficult to solve through the effort of only one country. Until now, mankind has overcome difficulties with its unique strength in difficult times. Such examples include the enactment of the European Climate Act, the rejoining of the US President Biden to Paris Climate Accord, and the announcement of South Korea's carbon neutrality strategy. These positive signals can help enhance adaptation by empathizing with the urgency of response and advancing the action to be taken place. In particular, the introduction of carbon border tax and the 2035 ban on the sale of internal combustion vehicles are expected to send stronger messages to the market, changing the way manufacturers operate and changing the way consumers consume patterns. We, who have spent decades on overproduction and overconsumption to use up what is left for next generation, will face considerable difficulties in the coming decades. We need to prepare and we adapt to a new paradigm that is completely different from what we've done so far. It's time we put all the power we can together right now to give the next generation a safe and clean planet. It would not be too much to say that the UN's ambitious cooperation and efforts for carbon neutrality around the world have paid off through the UN's Asia-Pacific Regional Forum today. In 2015, Chungcheongnam-do Province Governor Yang was appointed as the co-chair of the Asia-Pacific region, which has been vacant since the Under-2 coalition was established, setting a great example for the Asia-Pacific region, where the greenhouse gas emission industry was widely distributed and once again reminded of the importance of the carbon neutrality. I'm sure the Under-2 Coalition Asia-Pacific Regional Forum will be a new stimulus for Asia-Pacific, including South Korea. I think this forum is a good opportunity to clearly communicate the goals and the policy directions of Under-2 Coalition to existing members and to engage new drivers in our efforts to prevent global warming. There is no doubt that the effort of the Under-2 Coalition and Chungcheongnam-do Province will enable the realization of carbon neutrality to take place faster than we expected. This is because the movement for the transition to a carbon neutrality society, such as low-carbon-oriented economic structure and creation of a new promising low-carbon ecosystem, is more active than ever before, and more countries and local governments are joining in the move. From now on, we must prepare systematically and quickly to respond proactively and preemptively to the new paradigm shift of carbon neutrality. The transition to renewable energy, the development of innovative technologies in the industrial sector, and all-out efforts to reduce carbon emission in everyday lives are essential for the realization of carbon neutrality. Due to the rapid increase in carbon emissions since the industrial revolutions, many countries are threatened with life as well as economic difficulties. Climate change has a particularly large impact on underdeveloped countries. Most of these countries rely heavily on the agricultural and fisheries, and climate change is causing them to become more impoverished. Sharing these technologies with low development countries, along with the development of cheap renewable energy to minimize the damage of climate change, will be the best option. However, as it takes time to develop technology, the next best options for us now are to share applicable policies and promote cooperation. In this sense, Under2 Coalition and Chungcheongnam-do Province, as well as the US, Australia, and other local governments are playing a major role in preventing global temperatures from rising in the climate crisis and will greatly help fight climate change. If more countries and local governments participate in and try to preserve sustainable global ecology, I'm sure that 2050 carbon neutrality vision will never be an unrealistic goal and will surely be able to pass on this beautiful planet we are enjoying to future generations. We're all eager to pour all of our efforts and positive energies to protect the clean planet, and we are eager that the ambitious movement for carbon neutrality in this forum will continue to the New York Climate Week and also the COP26, which will be held in November in Glasgow. Thank you very much.
네, 대단히 감사합니다.
Thank
미래
you
세대를
very
위한
much.
탄소 중립의 중요성,
For future generation,
그리고 전
importance
국가적
of the
협력의
carbon
필요성에
neutrality
대해서 잘
and the
말씀해
necessity
주셨습니다.
of the co-action
소중한 말씀
was
감사드립니다.
reaffirmed by his speech. Thank you
지금
very much.
여러분께서는 언더2연합 아시아 태평양 지역
You are
포럼,
with us
지금
now
이곳
in the
춘천남도에서
Asia Pacific
함께하고
Race to
계십니다.
Zero opening ceremony for Under2 Coalition Asia Pacific
기후 위기를
Regional Forum.
멈추고 탄소 중립을 실행하기 위해서는 우리 모두의
To
참여가
realize carbon
필요합니다.
neutrality and stop
가장
climate
쉽고
change,
의미
our
있게
effort is
기후
required.
위기
The
대응 행동에
easiest way
동참하는 방법이
to
있습니다.
join the
함께
action
영상으로
is
만나보시겠습니다.
included in the video. Please watch the video together. Race to zero.
네, 여러분, Race to
Do you know
Zero가
what
어떤
Race to Zero means?
Race to Zero
The Race to Zero campaign
기후 위기에 대응하고 지속 가능한 포용적 성장을
is a
위한
global
전 지구적 탄소 중립
carbon
캠페인입니다.
neutrality campaign that responds to climate change, climate crises, and induces sustainable inclusive growth. Today, at the Under2 Coalition, we have prepared a meaningful time to participate in the Race to Zero campaign. Let's all chant Race to Zero as we're joining the campaign.
구호에 앞서
Before chanting,
부산님을 비롯한
Governor
내빈
Yang and other
Race to Zero
guests
카드를 들고
here
단상으로
in the
나와
venue,
주시기 바랍니다.
if you come to the podium with the Race to Zero card,
구호는
appreciate
하나
it.
둘셋 하면 Race to
I'll be counting
Zero를
1, 2, 3.
외쳐주시면
So,
됩니다.
under the count of 3,
네, 단상 위로
let's chant Race to
올라가
Zero.
주시면 고맙겠습니다.
Please come up to the podium.
기사님과 내빈 여러분께서는
Once
Race to
again,
Zero
Governor
카드를
Yang as
내밀면서
well as
함께 구호를
guests,
외쳐주시면
please
되겠습니다.
show the card and chant together, Race to Zero.
네, 자리 잡으시는 대로 바로 구호를
Okay, so
외쳐보도록
we'll start
하겠습니다.
as soon as you're ready.
하나 둘 셋 하면
On
Race
the
to
count of 3,
Zero를
let's
외쳐주시면
chant Race
됩니다.
to Zero.
자, 시작해 보겠습니다.
Let's start.
하나,
1,
둘,
2,
셋.
3.
Race to Zero. 네, 힘찬 박수
Please
부탁드립니다.
give a big round of applause to everyone.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
이 중요한 순간 순간을
Let's
사진에
now
그대로 담아 보도록
take a
하겠습니다.
photo and
하나, 둘, 셋 하면
memorize this
사진
important
촬영이
moment.
있겠습니다.
Again, on the count of three,
간격을 가깝게
we'll take a
붙여주시면
photo.
고맙겠습니다. 네, 하나,
One,
둘,
two,
셋,
three.
찰칵. 네, 다시 한번 찍겠습니다.
Okay, let's do it one more time.
하나,
One,
둘,
two, three.
셋. Race to zero. 네, 대단히 감사합니다.
Thank you, everyone.
자리로 돌아가
Now you
주시면
may come back to
고맙겠습니다.
your seat.
아시아 태평양 탄소
This
중립
now
레이스
concludes
언더2연합 아시아
the
태평양
opening
지역
ceremony
포럼 개막식 행사는
for the
여기까지입니다.
APAC race
바로
under two
이어서
coalition APAC regional
중앙정부 및
forum.
지방정부의
And next
탄소
stop,
중립 리더십
we'll be having
그리고
panel
에너지
discussions
전환
on the theme of
위기에서
state
기회로
and
라디오
regional
주제로
governments,
패널이
carbon neutrality
줌을
leadership,
통해
and energy
온라인으로
transition
토론이
from
이어질
crisis to
예정입니다.
opportunity. We'll be having this discussion
참여
by Zoom, so
부탁드리겠습니다.
please join
탄소
in the panel
중립이라는 대세가
discussions.
온 지구촌에
The carbon
울려
neutrality
퍼지기까지 응원하고 함께 하겠습니다.
will be
저는
heard
지금까지
all around the
아나운서
world
김이라였습니다.
and will be
고맙습니다.
in the effort to making that happen. My name is Kim Hira. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Very much welcome to this presentation and this session on net zero leadership in state and regional governments. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tim Ashvai. I'm the director of the Under2 Coalition Secretariat, which is based at the Climate Group in London. Shortly, I'll be moderating a panel session with colleagues from Australia, the United States, and others from Chungnam province, and very much looking forward to that discussion. Before I do so, I'm just going to give a short presentation and an overview on the topics of net zero and on the Under2 Coalition. And I'm hoping shortly that some slides will be projecting, which will just that I'll be able to talk along to. So firstly, let me just say who we're going to have here today. Along with myself, we're going to have Mark Rodriguez, the Executive Director for Climate Change in Victoria. We're going to have Kate Wilson, who's the Executive Director for Climate Change and Sustainability in New South Wales. Anna Leasing from the Government of Washington State will be joining us. And thank you for joining us at this time for you, Anna, that's great. And Mr. Namjan Lee, the Director General of Climate and Environment Bureau in Chungnam Province. After we speak, we're also going to have a short video message from one of our esteemed colleagues, Rafael Catania, who is the Minister for Climate Environment within the government of Lombardy. So let me just run through this presentation here and just explain a little bit around what we call net zero futures and what we see as being the regional opportunities ahead of COP26. I'll be talking about the Under2 Coalition, our work on net zero futures, which is a particular program that we're running, and the Race to Zero, which I know you've heard a little bit around already. So a slide will come up which should introduce the Under2 Coalition and explain that the Climate Group is the secretariat of the Under2 Coalition, and we work with governments to accelerate climate action through three main work streams. We have pathways to 2050, so what are the ambitions, the long-term ambitions that governments should be setting. We work on policy innovation. How do governments work together and share the experiences that they have in order to be able to meet those long-term pathways? And we hold ourselves to the principles of transparency. So we want our governments to disclose and to share what it is that they are doing in order to meet the ambitions they set out. Now, this slide already is slightly out of date. We have nearly 50% of the world's economy, 1.5 billion people, and a global footprint that incorporates something in excess now of 250 governments worldwide. So that is the Under2 Coalition. All of our members are either state or regional governments, or in some cases they are the first tier of governments who provide the national governments who provide endorsement to the work of the Under-2 coalition. I'll just talk a little bit further around how we run ourselves. Now, one of the things that we're very lucky is that we have 5 wonderful co-chairs of the Under-2 coalition. Amongst them is Governor Yang from Chungnam province, and really delighted to have Governor Yang to be our Asia Pacific co-chair. We also have 4 other co-chairs. For Africa, we have Premier Zikalala from KwaZulu-Natal province rather. In Europe, our co-chair is Nicola Sturgeon, who's the First Minister for Scotland. And of course, people will know that this is particularly appropriate because this year the Conference of the Parties, COP26, will be being hosted in Glasgow, one of the principal cities in Scotland. For Latin America, we have Francisco Servian, who is the governor of Querétaro province in Mexico. And for our North America co-chair, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is our co-chair. So that's where we are. So I'm just going to ask the presentation. I think the slides have come up now. Would you be able to move forward, please? We're actually on to slide 6, which you'll see once you go through. So move the 4 slides forward, please. One more. So that's the slide that I've just spoken to. So there you have the pictures that support our leadership team. Next slide, please. The next slide, I don't expect you to read this slide, but this really is just illustrating how the narrative around net zero has become far more powerful in the last 18 months. I think back to early in 2020, and we were discussing the position of net zero, the importance of net zero in the run-up to COP26, and this seemed like a very far away kind of prospect. But what we have here is articles from all over the world, from Spain, France, from Germany, from the States, and from the UK. And in these articles just give us some sort of sense of exactly how net zero has become the defining
점점 더 넷제로라는 것이 얼마나 명확한 움직임이 되고 있는지를 알 수 있습니다.
Next slide, please.
Due to the technical difficulties, we cannot provide English and Korean simultaneous interpretation service.
Have the next slide.
기술적인 문제로 통역이 제공될 수 없습니다.
The next slide. Great, thank you. So really what we want to talk about is, why do we want to go to net zero? Well, firstly, because the science is clear. The latest IPCC report shows that if we continue to emit dangerous greenhouse gases at the current level, extreme weather events and global warming experienced to date will worsen. And I think anybody who's been watching the news in the recent weeks and months from around the world will see that the warnings are very clear. And many of, if not all of you, I'm sure will have seen the latest iteration of the IPCC, the 6th assessment report that came out recently. The economic case around going for net zero is very manifest, and I'm sure colleagues will talk powerfully around that from their experiences in other governments around how that economic case for setting pathways towards net zero will benefit the economy and livelihoods of people across the world. And particularly, we were talking about it in this context because of the jurisdictional powers of state and regional governments, because they have the jurisdiction on sectors that can define long-term emission reductions and sustainable development, on power, on transport, on housing, potentially on land use as well. So, a few months ago, we established a project called Net Zero Futures, which is an initiative to mobilize global, state and regional leadership on net zero ambition. If we go to the next slide, what we have there is just 3 short bullets that explain what Net Zero Futures is trying to do. What we're trying to do with the Under2 Coalition is to enhance the profile of leading world-leading net zero states and regions through their membership of the Net Zero Leaders Group, to equip states and regions with access to the latest available knowledge, science, international expertise on net zero target setting and long-term decarbonisation pathways. And we want to encourage states and regions to join the global momentum in the run-up to COP26 through the United Nations High-Level Champions Race to Zero campaign. Have the next slide, please. The Net Zero's leader group that we've set up is a dedicated space for state and regions to recognise and celebrate their ambition. That group really is looking at how ambitious targets can be set and can be achieved, and how states and regions can support each other in making progress in their jurisdictions. We want to share success stories, facts, key steps. We want to connect people on net zero ambition setting, and the convening power of the Net Zero Leaders Group within the Under2 Coalition will be shared widely through a proactive communications campaign leading up to COP and thereafter. Can we have the next slide, please? Super. And actually, we can go one more forward again, please. Next slide. There we just have an illustration of some of the leaders that we have around the world who've made their commitment to net zero. Colleagues from Victoria will be pleased to see their Minister Lily D'Ambrosio there. From Washington, we have Jay Inslee and see Governor Yang as well. So if we can go to the next slide. I hope this comes through clearly. You can see the list. Actually, that's a little bit washed out, but I hope that the slides will be shared afterwards. And what you can see there is that we have members in the Asia-Pacific region, in Europe, in Latin America and North America. There are 35 in all who have already committed towards net zero within the Under2 Coalition. This aligns with, people may have heard of something called the Race to Zero. So if we go to the next slide, please. What we're talking about is the Under2 Coalition as being a key partner to the Race to Zero. And what we are doing is we're working with the high-level champions group for climate action for COP26 for the United Kingdom. It's a gentleman called Nigel Topping and his predecessor from the Chilean government, Gonzalo Munoz, to establish this Race to Zero. And it's a challenge campaign that they've set up for what they call the non-state actors within the UN system. So not the national governments, but the regions and states, the cities, businesses, universities, the non-state actors in the UN way of describing them, to set up their plans to reach net zero and to halve their emissions by 2030. And that campaign's been amazingly successful, has already involved nearly 1,000 cities, over 30 regions, 3,000 businesses, and very excitingly, some of the biggest investors in the world. And that joining of that Race to Zero campaign, we support very strongly through the Under2 Coalition, because we believe that it's going to drive climate action from across the whole of society and be recognised as credible and science-based, and supporting what is going on through the United Nations system and the negotiation process in the COP process itself. If we go to the next slide. And what that next slide just simply sets out is what we are doing within the Under2 coalition to support states and regions to join the Net Zero Futures initiative, through the Net Zero Futures initiative to join the Race to Zero. And we will share a members' toolkit to help the states around the world to go for that net zero ambition. And we're working with Chungnam province to identify states around the region who will hopefully be joining the Under2 coalition and make this level of commitment in the future. So what I've been able to do there is just give you a very brief overview of the Under2 coalition. And I'd now like to go into the panel discussion. I have colleagues here, and I'd love to ask Kate and Mark if you'd be able to, if you're happy to take your cameras on, and we'll be able to move into the Great, thank you. Just getting a little bit of interference coming through on my audio. I hope that everyone is able to hear me okay. So moving into the panel discussion now, as I say, we've got people from the government of New South Wales, Singh from the government of Washington. We have Nam Lee from the government of Chungnam province, and we have Mark Rodriguez from the government of Victoria. I think that audio has cleared up now, and I hope that we're able to carry on. So in this session, I'd like to just ask a couple of very simple questions, but important questions around why states and regions should go to net zero. What are the economic opportunities associated with making this commitment? What are the costs of inaction? I'd like to invite Mr. Namjai Lee to speak first on this topic. Mr. Namjai Lee, if you're happy to address this question, please.
Hello, I'm Namjae Lee, Director General of Climate and Environment Bureau of Chungnam Province. Globally, global warming is getting more and more serious, and I believe we need to respond to this. And in the recent IPCC report has raised this issue once again. About 3 years ago in the research, reaching this 1.5 degrees Celsius, it'd be 2052, but this report says that it will be before 2040 that we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. So according to the World Bank's prospects, if we keep with this inaction, then by 2050, around 1.3 billion people will be exposed to the risk caused by natural disasters. And the total loss will be amounted to 158 trillion won. And we can see that the wildfire occurred in Australia, the US, and also the heat waves and torrential rains. And as you see from these examples, the loss that caused by climate crisis will be more severe. So this reduction in the CO2 emissions is not an option, but a must. And the fossil fuels should be replaced by PV and offshore wind power, and the ICE needs to be replaced by EVs and hydrogen vehicles. So there are these efforts in place. So going forward, I believe that the transition will hold more and more importance. So the clean energy and eco-friendly mobility, and also the transition to eco-friendly way of doing farming, I believe that there will be new opportunities going forward. Chungnam Province also will expand policies regarding implementation of PV and offshore wind power and the hydrogen use, and we are also considering these RE100 bases in the industrial sector. And I also, in this effort, the role of state government is very important. Their pursuit towards the carbon neutrality propose directions nationwide, and this will be a strong driving force in achieving local government's carbon neutrality. So therefore, we would need to have more realistic goals, and in this process, I believe the state governments and local government need to work together so that we can reach our ultimate goal of carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Namjai Lee. I was now going to call on Mark Rodriguez. Mark, Victoria was the first Australian state to legislate in line with the Paris Agreement for net zero emissions by 2050. As one of the sort of front runners around this move to net zero, I wonder if you could say a little bit around why you felt it was important to go for net zero, and similarly talk around the economic issues and opportunities associated with making that commitment.
Thank you, Tim, and it's a great pleasure to be joining this forum from Melbourne in the state of Victoria. I do want to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the lands of traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Look, it's a really good question about the role of states, and I think as you mentioned, Tim, and the previous speaker mentioned, we think states have an important role to play. Climate change is one of those truly universal challenges where no one actor, no one level of government, no one business, no one part of the community can solve this problem on their own. We do need partnerships, and we need everyone to be contributing to action. And in Australia, states hold really quite important levers in that effort. So that's part of the driver for a state like Victoria to be putting its flag in the sand and taking some positive action on climate change. Part of the costs, I guess, is in Victoria, in Australia, we feel it quite acutely because we're experiencing it. We talk about extreme weather events and them becoming more severe, more frequent, and we're already seeing that here in Victoria, in Australia. It wasn't so long ago in the summer of 2019-20, just before COVID, that we had some devastating bushfires in Victoria that burnt through some 1.5 million hectares of land here in Victoria and are estimated to have cost around $2.1 billion in economic damage. It's the sort of impact and event that you might previously have expected to see once every 50 years or so, but it comes a mere 10 years after the Black Saturday bushfires of 2008-9 in Victoria. And we're seeing that in other climatic events. We've been in drought for much of the past 20 years, but that's interspersed with pretty severe flooding events and rainfall events. So we're living the temperature rise that we've seen, and with the projections the way they are, can expect to see more of that in future. But I think one of the things that's been really interesting to watch debate evolve over the past few years has been that shift from a focus on cost and this idea that climate change is all about cost to one of economic opportunity. And that's been a really powerful driver for Victoria and the action it's taken in releasing its first climate change strategy earlier this year. There's an increasing body of research that says that green stimulus, green actions actually have a lot of economic advantages, including greater job creation, faster implementation timeframes, as well as having those environmental and health benefits. And that's been really important. So just to give you a few examples, here in Victoria, we've committed to 50% renewable electricity generation by 2030. And we estimate the impact of that across the supply chain is going to generate over 24,000 jobs. We think that the cut in energy costs that will ensue from that will benefit households and businesses in Victoria by around $13 billion. And the improved air quality from burning fossil fuels will have around $2 billion worth of health benefits to Victoria. So that's been a really positive shift in terms of the focus on the economic opportunity and have been a really important driver of climate action in Victoria. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Mark. Kate from New South Wales, I'm just going to join a call on you next, because I think Anna Leasing hasn't been able to join us just yet. I've been enjoying working with New South Wales quite a lot in recent weeks and hearing about the plans that you have and your ambition to provide sort of global leadership around net zero. But Kate, I'm really interested in this idea around how you set out in the net zero plan, this kind of, as Mark was describing similarly, how you enhance prosperity, quality of life for people in New South Wales, but are also looking to drive emissions reductions at the same time. It'd be great to hear from you, Kate.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you also to the conference organisers for inviting me to this important conference. And I'll start, as we importantly do in Australia, also by acknowledging the traditional owners. So I'm on the land of the Ku-ring-gai people, somewhat north of Mark, but in the same part of the world. So yes, for us in New South Wales, there's two main drivers to put such a big emphasis on shifting to a net zero economy. The first is just the huge economic opportunity which Mark has just referred to, and here in Australia, we're really blessed with an abundance of resources. That's particularly renewable resources. We have land, we have a skilled workforce, and we have a safe society, which puts us in a very good position for shifting to the new industries. And also importantly, in Australia, considering our constitutional system, it's actually the jurisdictions, the subnational governments that have policy responsibility for many of the majority of the emissions, so electricity, transport, most of transport, industry, agriculture. We have many of the policy levers. And so it's directly down to the states to actually take positive action. We've taken, like most of the jurisdictions, we've really looked at the economic opportunities in designing our net zero plan. So we released a plan, net zero plan, stage 1 for 2030 in March last year. March 2020, which lays out at a high level plans across each of the major emission sectors and takes a sort of themed approach. So there's a large emphasis at the moment on applying technologies that already exist and getting on with those across the sectors. There's work on assisting consumers to change to a more sustainable future. There's work on beginning to lay the ground for the long-term future, and then work on government leading by example. And we estimate that our policies will deliver at least a 35% cut on 2005 levels by 2030. And of course, we're looking at how we can ramp that up. You asked Tim about the economic opportunity. So to give one very concrete example, we're now transitioning to a renewable energy sector. We have an electricity infrastructure roadmap, which we estimate will attract about $32 billion of private investment. So we're establishing renewable energy zones in regional New South Wales. That's going to generate 6,500 construction jobs, about 3,000 ongoing jobs. That's the direct ones. And then, as Mark said, we anticipate many indirect jobs that will be generated as a result of that. And there's also considerable lease payments in the billions of dollars to the landholders who are using their land for that. Also, we feel it's very important to transition to, really embrace the opportunities of these new industries. I think Bloomberg has estimated that ESG assets would be about a third of total global assets by about 2025, which is a total value of 53 trillion. And I was looking at Australian data recently. I think already more than a third of assets under management here in Australia have those sustainability guidelines of some kind. New South Wales, like Victoria and the rest of Australia, has a very highly skilled workforce and great research, and we have a real opportunity actually to deploy some of these cutting edge clean technologies. So we're looking at that increasingly in industry, agriculture, even potentially looking at selling low carbon produce and carbon offsets to overseas markets. And then finishing, of course, on the risks. Well, both my previous speakers have referred to the 29 bushfires, which were strongest in New South Wales. We lost, had burnt 5.5 million hectares, so that's about 12 million acres of land. Again, costs in the billions of dollars. 26 lives lost directly, but then many from the smoke impacts, and it had a real impact on the people of Australia. I live in Sydney, so I was far from the actual fire front, but even in Sydney we were impacted by the smoke, day after day for about a month. So it really has changed people's understanding of some of the risks as well. So I think I'll leave it there, but on the upside we see huge economic opportunity.
Thank you, Kate. Those are powerful from both you and Mark about the impact of the fires. And I don't think anybody watching that can be in any doubt about just how horrific that was. And of course, seeing extreme weather events across Europe recently in terms of flooding, and of course these huge heat spikes that they've been experiencing in North America. I think it's a very important point that you raise there around high-skilled jobs. One of the things that we at the Climate Group have been really emphasizing is the quality of jobs, the new technology jobs that are available to people. I think there is an understandable nervousness when we talk about powering past coal, that we are somehow overlooking skills and qualities that have been successful for us in the past, but it's also to emphasize the fantastic opportunities that there are in the new economy as well. I'd now like to pass back to Mr. Namjai Lee. Mr. Namjai Lee, Chongnam declared a climate emergency in 2019. It became the first local government to do so in East Asia, and that, I think, probably contributed to Chongnam setting a net zero target after that. Mr. Lee, what are some other important factors that need to be considered when setting a net zero target?
For Chungnam province, for the first time in South Korea back in 2017, declared the climate emergency. Back then, this is a local government and local region that is fast responding to the climate change issues faster than anybody else in South Korea. And as of 2020, the first source for the energy supply, the coal account for 24.9% and oil account for about 37.9%. In total, they account for about 62.8%. And the final consumption of the energy, the coal and oil account for about 63.1%, which is the highest among other resources of the energy. The energy sector also takes up about 35.5% in terms of the emission of the greenhouse gases, which is the highest level. And the manufacturing level followed with the 25.6%. And the transportation takes up about 13.5%, and the commercial and the household takes up about 7.2%. Based on this kind of basic data, for the 2050 carbon neutrality, the energy industry and manufacturing and construction sector, transportation sector should take an innovative transition. So the basic capital investment that we have put into it and the burden when we withdraw the policies and also the economic cost of the development of the technology made our transition a little slower. But even so, the energy industry and transportation sector, they try to reduce the fossil fuel use and also try to think about what kind of diverse policies should be adopted to make the foundation for the carbon neutrality. As of August, we have announced, the South Korean government announced the scenario draft for the 2050 carbon neutrality and also declared the strategy for the net zero of the greenhouse emissions. We are going to enhance the renewable energy and hydrogen and nuclear power plant. And also, we are going to use the capturing and storing of the greenhouse gases, thereby making zero of the net emission of the greenhouse gases. In the industrial sector, the bio and hydrogen will be the the fuels that we are going to have transition to, and the existing energy use will enhance the efficiency. And also, we promise to have transition by applying the CCUS technology for transportation, for the expansion and the distribution of the electrical and hydrogen vehicles, and also non-carbon drive will be provided in the railway. And the Chungnam province will be in line with that announcement of the central government of Korea. So by 2032, we are going to shut down 14 power plant units of the coal-fired power plant and will enhance its self-reliance on the renewable energy by 40%. And by 2030, we are going to establish the RE 100 innovative belt, and also will make the developed and technologically friendly and eco-friendly industrial complexes to create the smart green complex. And also will install the about 150 hydrogen chargers to adapt the hydrogen vehicles, which amount to about 450,000 vehicles by 2040. Now, the time is totally different from in the past. So we have to go with the positive signal of the world to advance the carbon neutrality. We will make an all-out effort to make it possible.
Thank you very much. I'd like to pass back to Mark Rodriguez again. Mark, I alluded earlier on to the fact that Victoria had legislated in line with the Paris Agreement. Can you say a little bit more around what the most important sectors are, where you really see the opportunity for immediate transition as being necessary to achieve the emissions reduction by 2050?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. For Victoria, electricity generation is really the foundation stone of our emissions reductions efforts. It directly accounts for some 40% of our direct emissions and is obviously a key enabler for future emissions reductions in other sectors such as direct combustion, transport and so forth, where electrification are key emissions reduction strategies. So that's really where a lot of our efforts are focused. It's also, I guess, important to sort of recognise that with that sort of transition, it requires a lot of planning, a lot of investment and so forth to move from a continuous to intermittent sources of generation, from a centralised to a decentralised network. So a lot of the focus there is really an investment is going into that sort of part of the emissions reductions. But I guess what we do also recognise is that net zero by 2050 means that we can't solely rely on electricity generation to do the work for us. All sectors need to play its part. So we're also investing across all sectors to reduce emissions where it's possible now, but also recognising that perhaps where the emissions reductions maturity isn't quite where it needs to be yet, the technology is not there, that we do need to place and put in place some foundational support to enable meaningful emissions reductions into the future, just because of the lead time it takes to work our way through and turn the tide in some of those sectors. So some of the key initiatives across other sectors in Victoria, we're working at restoring private and public lands and developing carbon farming initiatives. We're looking at developing the infrastructure to support wide-scale transition to zero emissions vehicles, and indeed setting a target for 50% of all new light vehicle sales to be zero emissions by 2030, which will be a huge leap from where we are, where less than 2% of sales at the moment are in zero emissions vehicles. We've also made a commitment from the public sector point of view to ensure that all new buses will be zero emissions by 2025. In agriculture, that's one of those sectors where it's going to be really technology dependent, and we do have some prospective technologies, and we're looking at investing in research and trials to develop those new technologies and practices, as well as supporting farmers to reduce emissions on farms. And finally, we're making major investments in our own waste and recycling industry to transition to a genuinely circular economy. Thank you, Tim.
Mark, thank you. That's some really good, tangible examples of things that are being done. And turning to you, Kate, what would you say are some of the most important factors to be considered when setting a net zero target? And how did they contribute to the creation of New South Wales' net?
Vary in different jurisdictions quite considerably. And then also understanding the economics, what are the economics drivers, what are the economic opportunities. It's always important to understand what's possible, so both what's possible politically, as in what's within the power of a state government in our system compared to a federal government, compared to local government. What are the low-hanging fruit, what are the early wins? And then mapping out how we'll get there. So you mentioned the climate group, or the Under2's Pathways project, as a great example of a way that we can help to think about how to get to that target. So perhaps if I just tell you how we went about it in New South Wales, we did the emissions modelling first to really understand what our major emissions sectors were, and they're fairly similar to Victoria. I think we're also about 40% will be electricity. And then transport, agriculture are very large as well, industry, fugitive emissions, because and so on from coal mining. We then considered what levers we had, so what is the available technology that we can also already apply, and a classic example that Mark mentioned is electric vehicles, which is so far very slow on the uptake here in Australia, but we've also released an electric vehicle strategy recently, which is really trying to stimulate the market for electric vehicles by a combination of building up the required infrastructure, and offering a range of incentives for the purchase of electric vehicles, which we hope, when combined with similar policies in neighbouring jurisdictions like Victoria, will encourage a greater supply of electric vehicles into the Australian market, because the choice is still quite limited here. So we've done that. That's how do we encourage an existing technology? I talked earlier about the work we're doing on renewable energy, so we anticipate a very rapid change to a much higher, very significant proportion of renewable energy by 2030. And then we're, at least in industry, working with electrification and some of the readily available changes, and how do we stimulate that. Also, like Mark we described in Victoria, we're looking at the land sector and how do we both reduce direct emissions but also generate new markets for carbon sequestration. We're blessed with a large amount of land and real opportunities for carbon sequestration. We also we have a chief scientist here in New South Wales, and he commissioned a group of experts to provide a report on the economic opportunities from decarbonisation as well. So we also have that really guiding our practical action here in New South Wales. And finally, we are looking to the future, and we know that we've got many strategies we can implement right now that will get us deep cuts by 2030. But again, post-2030, we will need new technologies, and so we're investing in technologies of the future and planning for the actions we can implement post-2030, once the electricity system is largely renewable, so we reduce the emissions there, and we really have to tackle some of those harder to abate sectors.
Thank you. Some really interesting insights there around how we go around this question of setting and delivering net zero targets at the state and regional level. I think one of the things that came out very strongly for me was the importance of being led by the science, the physical science, but also the social science, the economic opportunities, the societal opportunities that are present. I think, having worked in the sector for a while, I think the thing that I'm finding really exciting is we know these solutions. It's around pace and urgency and good planning and investment in order to be able to move forward. And some very practical things that we've talked about there around zero emission vehicles, hydrogen, electric vehicles, buses, and other means of freight. Just talk a lot about electricity generation, very important in Chongnam, in New South Wales and in Victoria. But the pace of that movement and the purpose and intent is definitely something that comes out around being really deliberate about what you're trying to do, having good plans and strategies. I think our colleagues from Scotland have taken a lot from the work from the UK's Climate Change Committee around really understanding the science and setting out those targets in line with the science as being really important. And I think it's really interesting hearing from state and regional governments around different areas as well, like agriculture and land use, and both in terms of the risk side and the risk to land use, soil erosion and drought and fire, as well as flash floods, but also the carbon storage potentials as well. Interesting to hear from Chongnam around the work around carbon capture and storage as well, because as Kate said there at the end, beyond 2030, we're going to need to be investigating in a far more aggressive way those strategies that we have in order to be able to change the dynamic on carbon abatement beyond 2030. So thank you to all our panelists for their input today. Before we close this panel, we have a final message from Minister Rafael Cattaneo, who's the Minister for Climate and Environment in the Government of Lombardy. I'd now like to ask for the video to be played from Rafael.
롬바르디 정부 기후환경 장관님의 메시지를 듣겠습니다.
Dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure for me to address a message to this important event, the Asia Pacific Regional Forum, Race to Net Zero in Asia Pacific. A brief message from my region, from Lombardy, the most important region of Italy, 10 million inhabitants, the region of Milan, the most developed and at the same time the most affected by the consequences of pollutions and climate change. Let me share with you 3 brief ideas. First, climate change is a global issue, at the same time global and local. Of course, we are together engaged in the challenge of tackle climate change, how to mitigate climate change and ensure sustainable development to our territories, to our world. But to do this, we need to think globally and act locally. And this is the reason why our subnational authorities play a key role in the path toward a different future, able to tackle climate change. Second idea, we need to improve cooperation at regional level and local level. And this is the reason why we are proud to be member of Under2 Coalition and other important networks of regions and local authorities. Precisely because we need to act locally and to learn one the other, to share best practices, to share experiences. And this is the reason why we are going to host in Lombardy the pre-COP, the preparation table to the COP26, and in the frame of the pre-COP we are organizing with Scotland an event called All for Climate pre-COP26, the cooperation of Under2 Coalition, Regions 4 and other regional networks. We need to stress the role of regions and local authorities in this fight against climate change. And the third idea is related to on what we are doing in Lombardy. In Lombardy, our experience is based on concrete policies to be more and more leader in this transition. We have just adopted the Regional Energy and Environment Climate Program, and in this we have a lot of mitigation and adaptation policies. Just an example, mitigation policies include suitable measures to reduce greenhouse gas emission into the atmosphere, measures aimed at the absorption of carbon in natural systems, and measures aimed at capturing and storing carbon dioxide. And adaptation goals are to improve more and more the capacity of resilience of the territories in different ways. But although all these measures call for an inclusion of civil society, we need to act policies in many sectors like energy, building, mobility and transport, agriculture, industry, infrastructure, tourism, and so on, but we will be able to concretely implement the measure we need with the cooperation of civil society. So engage family, companies, workers, university, associations is our first concrete and useful policy, in my opinion. Thank you, and have a good day, and of course we are waiting for you in Lombardy when you want, particularly during our meeting next 30 September at the pre-COP in Milan. Thank you so much.
And thank you to Minister Catania and to all of the speakers in our Net Zero Leadership panel. Now we're going to take a short break, and afterwards my colleague Sam Kimmins, who is the head of RE100 at the Climate Group, will take the floor to lead a panel discussion on the risks and opportunities associated with transitioning to renewable energy. Thank you everyone for tuning into the event so far. The next panel discussion will commence shortly. Thank you everyone.
Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Sam Kimmins. I'm the head of RE100 with the Climate Group, and I have the great privilege of moderating the final panel of today's session. Just to check, my audio is coming through. Obviously, it's a great shame I can't be with you in person today. I always do love to visit Seoul, but at least we can all be here virtually. So just to check, if somebody could pop me a little message to see if my audio is coming through. Great. So before I introduce our panel of experts today, I'd like to thank Cheongnam Province, the Under2 co-chair and the Under2 Coalition for organising this overall event and this panel. To introduce myself, for those of you who don't know us, RE100 is a project led by the Climate Group in partnership with CDP, bringing together 320 global corporates, all committed to want to use 100% renewable electricity for their global operations. Together, they have demand for over 330 terawatt hours a year of renewable electricity. That's more demand than the whole of the UK, that's more demand than the whole of Australia, and around 2/3 the total demand of South Korea. And the membership includes household names and some industry giants like Woolworths, Sony, IKEA, industry giants like Sun Metals, TSMC and SK Hynix. As I say, all of these companies committed to 100% renewable electricity and making real progress and putting their money where their mouths are. In this session, we bring together an international panel of experts to look at the risks and opportunities for the Asia-Pacific region as the world undergoes the biggest industrial shift in modern history, the shift to clean energy. Increasingly, when I speak to RE100 member companies, those companies committed to 100% renewable electricity, the way they talk about renewables is not just saying it's the right thing to do. For them, the energy transition is happening now, and they need to be part of it. They need to be on board. This is the right thing to do for their businesses to remain competitive. Solar power recently declared by the IEA to be the cheapest form of power in history, this is perhaps unsurprising. And with businesses increasingly making investment decisions based on the availability of renewables for themselves and for their supply chains, it's no surprise that leading governments are also recognising that there will be winners and losers in this energy transition in terms of jobs, investment and economic opportunity available for those who are able to move fast and seize the opportunities of this new economy. President Tsai recently noticed that the ability for companies to achieve RE100 is a critical consideration for industrial policy. So how well placed are the countries and companies of the Asia-Pacific region to retain their competitive edge during this huge clean energy transition? Will countries like Australia and South Korea have parts of their economy shackled by antiquated coal systems of a bygone age, or be weighed down by stranded assets? Or will they be able to fully grasp the opportunity to be the renewable energy powerhouses and the clean supply chain powerhouses of the future? With this in mind, it's critically important to identify the barriers and opportunities in the race towards net zero in Asia Pacific and understand how businesses and government can work together towards this goal. Not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's critical for the future of economic success. So with me today to look at these questions from the point of view of business, energy supply, government advisors, NGO and think tanks, I'd like to welcome our esteemed guests. So Melissa Hamilton, the Country Sustainability Manager of IKEA Australia, welcome. Daniel Kim, the Chief Executive Officer of Arc Energy Corporation. Yu Yun Chung, Head of Business Development for the Asia-Pacific region of NL Green Power. Wang Ji-yong, Senior Associate of Angora Energy Vend, South Korea. Ji-yong Yong, Associate Professor of KAIST College of Business and Head of KAIST Graduate School of Green Growth. And Jo-Jun Kim, Managing Director and Founder of Solutions for Our Climate. So welcome to all of our esteemed guests. So we're going to go through the, I'll ask you a question, one each of you a question, and before we go into a more open session, starting with you, Melissa. We know IKEA well, we've been working together for a while as one of the founder members of RE100 with a bold ambition to use 100% renewable electricity since 2014, and the company has made incredible progress to achieve that goal. You're now going even further, making great progress in electrifying your vehicle fleet. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've achieved this ambitious 100% goal in Australia, and why IKEA believes that renewable electricity and electric vehicles make sense for IKEA?
Thank you for the introduction, Sam, and I would like to say again, thank you for the invitation today on behalf of IKEA to join this very important conference. Before I respond to your question, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of the land, and I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Eora Nation, and extend the respect to any other Indigenous Australians who are present. I come to you from Sydney, Australia today. Firstly, it's important to know our goal is to reach 100% zero emissions vehicles for home deliveries by 2025. We still have some way to go to meet that goal. The emissions that we produce is the aim of our climate positive agenda within IKEA. We have achieved 2/3 of our buildings that run on 100% renewable electricity worldwide. By 2025, our aim is to be 100% renewable electricity, heating and cooling in all our buildings. In Australia, we have almost 21,000 solar panels on the rooftops of all of our stores. These panels have a capacity of 5.7 megawatts and generate around 22% renewable energy to manage our own domestic operations. For IKEA, we see the transition to net zero as an inevitable. We want to be ahead of the game. It's the right thing to do, but because we know over time it will be the right decision for our business. Our goal of 100% transport for customer deliveries and services to use electric vehicles or other zero-emission solutions. We are focused on working with our service partners to electrify their fleets and implementing charging infrastructures on our sites. Zero emissions future for our business, but we cannot get there alone. Such as Shanghai, IKEA has achieved its goal of having 100% of home deliveries powered by EV. And in January 2021, IKEA China has been able to achieve 90% of their national deliveries through emissions transport. And look at how they've been able to achieve this. Since 2009, the Chinese government has offered subsidies, tax waivers, and built charging points to encourage EV buyers and manufacturers. This enabled the conditions for the EV market to scale. When Australia must be reducing its greenhouse emissions, the upward trend in transport sector emission continues. It's the third largest overall greenhouse gas emitter and remains a big challenge to confront as a nation and for our business. In Australia, availability, affordability, and charging infrastructure for electric vehicles are major barriers to achieving a clean transport future for both businesses and the public. Although transition is underway, we still require a clear direction and plan from federal government for the electric vehicle industry. Availability of vehicles and charging infrastructure, but most importantly, a nationally coordinated policy to support more EVs on the road and incentive from government to invest. Actions from the private sector and state government have started to take shape, as you heard from Kate and Mark today already. However, challenges need to be addressed early in all states and establish a successful market for EV. Before I finish, I would just like to quote two simple words from a famous Australian inventor, Saul Griffith. It's basically just electrify everything is a very, very good mantra of how we will solve climate change in the next few decades.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Melissa, I've got one quick follow-up question for you. And I hope this doesn't take you by surprise. I mean, IKEA is well known for setting really ambitious targets. I mean, yeah, it was actually Steve Howard of IKEA who brought up the idea of RE100. You know, 100% leaves no room for doubt. How has that helped you? And it must be incredibly nerve-wracking to have these really, really ambitious targets. But how does it help you to have these really audacious, no room for doubt targets?
Thank you for that question, Sam. Actually, not just within Australia and businesses that we also talk to, we also give the same kind of speech to government in terms of do not stall on your net zero commitment because you don't have a budgeted plan as of yet to deliver on that. Inspire people to drive action and do not be afraid to set a goal and then work out the how. We're very in terms of IKEA setting goals and then coming together with stakeholders to figure out how we can move towards these goals and set a strategy and action to fulfill that deadline. We still do not have all the answers, but how we will achieve our bold goals. But we do have that north driving guiding star to help us throughout the organization. Not only incumbent upon all businesses to set bold goals and take action, it's really the only way to future-proof your business for the next generations of consumers.
Great, thank you, Melissa. So moving now to a different sector of industry and both supply and buy side of renewable electricity for a very heavy industrial user. Daniel Kim, the Chief Executive of Arc Energy Corporation, welcome. So Arc Energy has the really challenging job of helping zinc refineries, Sun Metals and Korea Zinc achieve their RE100 goal. If you just bear with me 1 second. So zinc is a significant energy user and considered a hard-to-abate sector. Is this 100% ambition possible for a company like Sun Metals and Korea Zinc to achieve RE100? And what challenges do you think you'll be facing?
Well, good afternoon, Sam, and thank you for your question. There's no doubt that the RE100 commitment, which our sister company Sun Metals has signed up to, is incredibly ambitious. But it's Arc Energy's commitment to really back their courage and achieve our RE100 commitment actually well ahead of the 2040 deadline, which was set. So I think to put it in context, so Sun Metals Zinc Refinery is an Australian subsidiary of Korea Zinc, which is the largest zinc producer in the world. Sun Metals, in its own right, is in the top 10 zinc refineries in the world, with a nameplate capacity annually of 300,000 tonnes of zinc. And of course, the inherent process of refining zinc is through electrolysis. So it is incredibly electricity intensive. Annually, Sun Metals consumes close to 1.3 million megawatt hours a year. So it is an extreme user of electricity. So to sign up to RE100 is certainly ambitious, but we have a plan, and we are confident, again, that we'll be able to achieve that commitment well ahead of 2040. So the group actually started on this journey some years ago with the development of a 124 megawatt solar farm co-located with the zinc refinery. Arc Energy is accelerating Sun Metals' energy transition, and earlier this year we acquired a 30% interest in a 924 megawatt onshore wind farm in the same province. And so that wind farm will be fully commissioned by the end of 2024. So a combination of the solar and the wind farm gives us a total generation profile by 2025 of 85% of Sun Metals' entire operations being powered by renewables. Between now and then, of course, we will continue to look for ways to plug the gap to get us to the RE100, whether that be through a BESS or a battery, or through our ambition to be a major producer of green hydrogen. So I think, Sam, in short, we really believe it's achievable, and notwithstanding we operate in what has been and what is notoriously a very difficult to abate sector. But I think from an Arc Energy perspective, if we will leverage our experience decarbonising our sister company and the group, and look to help other third parties actually deliver their own and accelerate their own low carbon future.
Right. Thank you, Daniel. And you talk about green hydrogen and helping third parties. So you're not just seeing this as a sort of defensive action to get Sun Metals to its RE100 target. This is actually proactive business development as well. Are you seeing a business opportunity in moving into growing in this sector to help other companies?
No, absolutely, Sam. So it is Arc Energy's ambition to be the safest and one of the most competitive producers of green hydrogen in the world. And so part of that is being an extreme user of hydrogen and making it pervasive across the group's businesses, but it's also about stimulating the demand in the market. And I mean, of course, we believe that hydrogen produced from renewable energy provides that true green solution to decarbonising some of these notoriously hard to abate sectors. So, look, and hydrogen really gives us that opportunity to target the Scope 1 emissions, whereas those investments, of course, in renewables are really targeting those Scope 2 emissions.
Great. Daniel, thank you very much. So across now to a very large global supplier of electricity, Guyun Jung, Head of Business Development for the Asia Pacific region of NL Green Power. So, Guyun, NL is an energy supplier who's rapidly transitioning from your old fossil fuel heavy business to one based on green power. And I understand you're gearing up to make investments in Korea and a very active player in the APAC region driving the renewable electricity transition. What makes a good market for you as a renewable electricity supplier? What makes a good market for you to invest in?
Thank you for that question, Sam, and I'd like to also thank the organizers of this very important event and for inviting us to be here. Not only were we a fossil fuel plant operator, but we were, like any other utility in the world, a generator that was heavily relying on large centralized steam-based generation, whether that be nuclear, coal, or gas. And I would say even before this decarbonization trend started, we realized that these were risky investments because each project, in order of magnitude, you're talking about 1 gigawatt per project, 1,000 megawatts per project that takes anywhere between 5, 10, even 15 years to construct, and where technology is advancing very rapidly. And so when we saw that renewables was becoming market competitive as early as in the mid-2000s, in 2006, 7, and 8, when we really started to make our investments into renewables, where renewables, as you know, are modular. They can be built in smaller portions, well, at least compared to these large centralized generation units. And they are much shorter in lead time, so you can build them in 18 months or less. So we made a conscious business decision when even decarbonization was not the key, say, trend, to really focus on building out our renewables for very economic reasons. And then when we realized that climate change was serious and we really needed to get serious about decarbonization, in 2012 we embarked on this coal phase-out plan. So at the time we had about 18 gigawatts. For those of you in the audience that are not acquainted, 1 gigawatt is the equivalent of an average nuclear power plant. And we had 18 gigawatts of coal generation across the world. We decided to phase them out. And to this date, we have decommissioned more than half of that. So we're now at a little less than 9 gigawatts of coal in operation. And while our initial goal was to completely phase this coal generation out by 2030, we have brought that schedule forward to 2027 to phase out all of our coal generation worldwide. And as was mentioned by Ambassador Falia of Italy earlier in the session, in Italy there is also, which is our home country, there is a national deadline of coal phase out by 2025. So we are working with the regulators and the market to make that happen while assuring secure supply. So that's kind of what we're doing in terms of coal phase out. And in the meantime, our growth in renewables continues to accelerate. We are adding anywhere between 4 to 5 gigawatts a year in renewables. 50 gigawatts of renewables installed already, and our ambition is to add close to 100 gigawatts of new renewable capacity by the end of the decade. Now, your question was, what makes a good renewables market? And I would say in the Asia Pacific, we are going into those countries where there is a very clear will and stable regulatory signal from the government. And I think Korea, although it is a newcomer in the renewable space, I think it is providing that signal. The second thing that we look for is a good market design where there can be what we call this price discovery, so that we know that the market is sustained by the rules of supply and demand. And speaking of demand, it is also interesting for us to know that there will be this demand for renewable energy. And the fact that Korea has latched along this trend on RE100, introducing their own what's called the Korea RE100 is a very encouraging sign.
Great, thank you very much. So those market signals, there's the market signal, or the signal that the government is willing, the good market design ruled by the rules of supply and demand, and a known demand base, which, as you say, is certainly growing in South Korea. So far, 10 domestic companies joined RE100 with many more in the pipeline. So it's a really fast growing. A little bit behind Japan, where nearly 60 companies have joined RE100, but it's certainly Asia Pacific is taking the lead now in terms of the growth of interest in renewables by large corporates. We're certainly seeing most of the new RE100 members from the region. So we really do hope that together you can really accelerate that growth. I have a quick follow-up question for you. NL is you're finding you're phasing out your coal assets more rapidly than you thought you would be able to do, and you already phased out 9 gigawatts of your 18 gigawatt fleet. We're also seeing companies investing in new coal in the region. Would you see that as if you heard that your company was doing that, would you see that as a business risk, given the rapid phase out?
Frankly, yes, it is a considerable business risk. There is a considerable risk that it could be a stranded asset. Although I would say that the Asia context is a little bit different because the growth of demand is very dramatic. So probably wouldn't make sense in a mature market like Australia or Korea or Japan. But maybe there are other domestic reasons why this is being done in places, in other, say, emerging markets. And that is probably also a victim of having this lack of a clear policy or political will to do so.
Yeah. It strikes me as an interesting situation where, to meet short-term needs, there's a plant that take 10 to 15 years planning through to construction are being built, while the increasingly renewables are cheaper, much quicker to deploy. So it's a very interesting. We seem to be at a very interesting point where that short-term demand is being met by long-term assets that could be obsolete within the decade. So quite an interesting situation that those countries are in. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those insights, Gu-young. And now across to Joo-jun Kim. Joo-jun Kim is the Managing Director and Founder of Solutions for Our Climate. So my question for you, Joo-jun, is I said earlier 10 Korean corporations, now 14 Korean corporations have now committed to using 100% renewables globally, and companies like Sun Metals are proving this to be possible, for example, in their Australian operations. What are the key challenges that companies will face replicating this success in Korea?
Hi, good morning. Good day, everybody. Before going into answer the question, I'd like to thank thank the organizers of the event for inviting me. I'm very tempted to answer the question you just asked Mr. Jung right now. I'll get back the answer probably at the end of my talk right now. My response to your question. Going back to your question, what are the key challenges of renewable companies here in Korea? And I don't think this is just a problem. We see mainly two risks. Number one, the physical part. There are many problems with physical permitting, with outdated permitting schemes. And number two, the market structure. As mentioned, I don't think these problems are just limited to Korea. They will apply to many countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia. The problem about our physical permitting system, I mean, for Korea, in Korea's situation, we have as many solar plant permitting schemes as the number of subnational governments we have. So we have about 150 to 200 different solar power plant permitting systems. And the details are very interesting. In many subnational governments, including Chungnam province, there are regional requirements which require solar plants to be distanced from roads, even agricultural roads, dirt roads, to as much as 500 to 1,000 meters. These have nothing to do with environmental externalities, although the provincial governments say that this is because of this. And as you can see, it's very explicitly unscientific and irrational. Above all, our national government has been neglecting the mess here, existing here. And this is just one set of the problems. And if we go to onshore wind, offshore wind, similar problems exist. So if I ask my government, if my government asks me, how would I be able to show climate leadership? My answer would be, well, you can do a better NDC. You can do a 2050 net zero, show a 2050 net zero ambition. But I would say, Mr. President, I would preempt, organize these unscientific, irrational regulation, unreasonable regulations. The second point I mentioned was market structure, which is attributable to our vertically integrated and bundled feature of our power market. This is not, as I said, this is not just a feature applying to Korea. It also exists. I mean, these nationally owned, utility-based, bundled and vertically integrated structures exist in most of Asia. For a renewable developer, it's very difficult to supply its renewable power directly to a customer, especially corporate customers, without going through the difficulties of, without passing through the national utility. And the national utility would usually hold a lot of fossil fuel power plants. So the national utility would generally have a trend not to be welcome of renewable power plants. And the national utility, especially our national utility, KEPCO, seems to be exercising its authority over the grid to benefit its fossil fuel power plants at the expense of small-scale renewable power plants. Jeju province, which is another subnational government here, is a very good example. The province wants to be at least 30% renewables. Its renewables are right now curtailed at 16%. And guess who has the fossil fuel power plants there? Our national utilities subsidiaries have massive gas power plants down there. And if the 16% renewable generation rate goes up to 30%, who would lose money? 14% loss will come from the national utility. And the national utility at the same time is the company that has the authority to determine when a grid is safe or not with renewables. And they can also determine how flexible a grid can be practically. So there's a definite conflict of interest situation there. There's an antitrust situation there. I think these problems have to be overcome for our grid to be more flexible and accept more renewables. I think this problem is not just related to the renewable developers. Our big corporations, this market structure is becoming a risk. I mean, many of the clients of our big companies like Samsung are now, for example, Apple, have clean energy targets, and this will the backdatedness of our national utility will I believe soon become a business risk to our corporations. If I have time, I would like to respond to your last question to Mr. Jung. I mean, would that be fine? Or,
sure, yes.
The new coal power plants are definitely a risk. Coincidentally, our team released a report this Monday about the value of new coal power plants based on the current policies and based on the current power market regulations in Korea. We did evaluation based on a discounted cash flow method, and the equity value of the new coal power plants under construction were in many cases minus. And of course, they were way lower than the equity investment amount plus interest that were invested in the power plants. So for the equity holders, these coal power plants, and maybe also the lenders, the new coal power plants are definitely a financial risk, and our new coal power plants are being constructed under a certain level of moral hazard in our financial sector. very much. Those are my points.
Thank you very much, Jojin Kim, for that really eloquent response to both questions, and thank you for the data to back that up. I threw that question in unexpectedly, so it's great to hear both speakers give really eloquent responses. A more simplified and rationalised permitting system, but also a fairer market that's not tilted towards the old coal system, and perhaps finding incentives for KEPCO to move to the new power systems rather than remain locked into the old, and therefore work with them as enable them to work as an ally to net zero rather than feeling they need to protect their old systems. I'm going to move now to Kwang Hee-hyun, the Senior Associate of Agora Energy Vend, South Korea. We've heard that business has a strong role to play in the energy transition, both from the supply and demand side, but we've also heard, about the responsibility of governments. And one of the reasons why governments are around Southeast Asia, particularly, are still building coal-fired power stations is they have the responsibility to keep the lights on while also moving towards their net zero targets, and ensuring that businesses have the energy, the power that they need, while also shifting towards a system where that power is clean. From your experience in Europe, what are the key risks faced by the South Korean government and Asia Pacific governments more generally in balancing those two needs to transition to net zero while also keeping the lights on, and how might those challenges best be addressed from your experience?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me a chance to add my opinion in the remarkable conference, and also thank you so much, Sam, for such tough question. So let me start the overview of the policy change. And transition process brings up various social conflicts because it needs a change of supply and demand. In many cases, even consumers' behaviors change. Natural process seems more difficult compared to any other transitional process. For instance, in the energy transition, not only the change of the infrastructures in energy supply and demand, but also even industry structures should be changed. In this regard, so-called policy acceptance or transition acceptance by public is inevitably important. I would like to point out today. In Germany, where I'm working, we can find some lessons that the Korean government may learn. Good examples are Ethics Commission for Safe Energy Supply after the Fukushima crisis in 2011, and so-called Coal Commission in 2018 to 2019. 3 points I can raise. The first one would be the regulatory authority for the commissions. The government has no power to interrupt the commissions, just has a kind of the duty to provide information members of the commission ask for. The second thing is that the various stakeholders who represent a very complex society are invited in the commission. For instance, laborers, environmentalists, politicians, business, even priests were the member of the nuclear commissions in 2011. Last but not least, maybe most important for the Korean context, would be the openness and fairness in the commission. The government is not allowed to add its stance to the commission. It just provide information and financial or regulatory supports. For securing the transparency, in many cases, the discussions in the commission are open to public. Sometimes the debates are recorded so that the citizens can watch the commission's process anytime. The output from such transparent and open public commissions definitely has more power which citizens would accept. Recently, I read some news articles regarding the latest decision of the natural commissions in South Korea. Some members of the commission argued that there are more or less the government pressure to convince the commission with its stance. Let me conclude just one sentence. To secure or increase the social acceptance, the government should guarantee that more transparent and open discussion in the public participated commissions, but without any kind of intervention. That is the most important lesson I'd like to raise today. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. So it's not so much a technical solution, it's about transparency and inclusion to make sure that the population is brought on board and fully understands and has their voice heard. Thank you. That's a very, very interesting view. Some people might say, well, isn't there a risk there that the public is actually against the transition? Is there a risk that if you open up the conversation, people say, well, actually, no, I don't really want this? Has that been an issue that's been faced in Europe, in Germany, and how has that been addressed?
But so if we watch the current climate disasters in the US or in the Western Germany, so I cannot agree with what you mentioned that some people are against the energy transition.
Yeah. It's interesting, those voices do seem to be getting quieter, don't they? The dissenting voices, as unfortunately the evidence gets stronger. Thank you very much, Granji Yum, for those great insights, bringing the social aspect of the transition on top of the more technical elements. Final panelist for today, Ji-young Yeom, the Associate Professor of KAST College of Business and the head of the KAST Graduate School of Green Growth. We often hear, my question to you is, we've heard about the business opportunities, we've heard about some of the practical action that the governments need to take in the short term. But looking at the big picture, net zero is a huge goal, and it's going to require a doubling of our power supply capacity. We've calculated that for business to be supplied by renewables by 2050 will require 12,000 gigawatts of additional renewable power to be on the grid by 2050. That's a significant increase in annual additions over the next 30 years. The next 30 years. And of course, associated storage and grid capacity. This requires a pretty extensive toolkit, not just to set the goal, as we talked about earlier. It's important to have that goal that you may think is unattainable. It's important to start taking action right now. But what kind of toolkit will particularly the South Korean government need in order to guide industry in a credible way as it goes from those short-term targets and bridging that gap to the big hefty goal and really ambitious goal of zero carbon by 2050, coal phase out, etc. What is the toolkit that they need? What do they need in that toolkit to really credibly guide business?
Thank you, Sam, for your question. Yes, as you pointed out, the fundamental changes will be needed, required. Personally, I'm not very much optimistic about the possibility of achieving the carbon neutrality target under the currently considered policy and technology options in Korea. I think we need a new toolkit for a totally new set of problems, like carbon neutrality by 2050. I think in this sense, I think a credible long-term climate policy can promote technology innovation, and aggressive technology innovation can also leave the policy feasibility, policy the carbon neutrality policy feasibility window open down the road. So we need both of them, both the policy innovation and technology innovation. So first of all, in terms of policy innovation, policy actions, I would suggest a gradual introduction of carbon tax and eventually its nationwide implementation. And the schedule for carbon tax should be announced beforehand. This would encourage investors and firms to put their capital where it is needed at the right time without delay. And revenues from those carbon tax can be used to fund clean energy investment and energy sector transitions. This can be strengthened over time as we approach the net zero target. The good thing about the carbon tax is that it can reduce uncertainty to investors and possibly improve what we call cost effectiveness if it can be implemented nationwide. The second point is about the technology innovation. I think we need technology neutrality as much as we are serious about carbon neutrality. I think we need to put safe, clean nuclear power on the table if we are really committed to achieve the target. Although Jujin just commented on the financial risks of nuclear power. According to our analysis, to meet the land requirement for solar PV without nuclear, we will need 10 times the area of Seoul. Would it be socially acceptable? We are experiencing also this what we call fourth industrial revolution, electricity-based economy, and where economic losses due to disruption, power disruption would increase exponentially. So are we all okay with compromising power reliability in order to increase the share of renewable energy to more than half the total electricity generation? Another point here about the technology innovation is I think we also need to start investing in long-term climate game changers, such as direct air capture, forest soil management, and mineral carbonation. We are not talking about carbon mitigation. We are talking about net zero or carbon neutrality by 2050, which is very, very ambitious goal. We cannot rely only on renewables. We need objective technology assessment and technology innovation policy to have the feasibility of achieving the carbon neutrality target wide open to carbon down the road. So that is my point.
Thank you very much for that, Ji Young for those final remarks. I'm going to follow up with a question to you, but also to the rest of the panel. I'm building on your response there. We often hear from, when we speak to policymakers and some businesses in the region, and particularly in South Korea, that Korea's available wind and solar resources are not sufficient to power the entire country renewably. Is this a physical impossibility? What do you say to that? What would you advise I say when asked that question? And we know that University of Stanford has done studies to show what the potential for going for 100% is in South Korea. But what's your response to that question? I'm starting off with Ji Young, but opening up more broadly.
So can I comment on that question first?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we need to pursue the cost effectiveness of achieving the target. So I mean sure. So 100% renewable is technically feasible. I mean we can continue to invest in all this kind of what he calls flexibility resources like energy storage systems and demand side resources and everything. But that is very, very costly to achieve. And we need to compromise some of our power system reliability in doing so. So I think we need to consider cost effectiveness of the target, achieving the target. So in that sense, I think there is no silver bullet. I mean, all technology should be in there. We shouldn't be excluding specific part of technology from our toolkit.
Great, thank you very much. I saw a hand up earlier, but I can't see that hand up anymore.
That was me.
Great.
Well, Very good question, and I think this relates to the physical permitting point that I mentioned during my previous talk. And this discussion is actually happening when our government is designing our 2050 pathway. One of our pathways says that we'll have to be 70% renewables by 2050, and there are people in these discussions that say this is possible, and there are people who say this is not possible. The reason why they say that is some people say that we have to distance our PV plants, solar plants, 300 meters away from certain facilities, and some people say it's 100 meters. And for the people who say it's 100 meters, it should be only 100 meters away from certain facilities, 70% renewables is possible, whereas who don't, it's not possible. So I think this is totally a social engineering issue, and I have no doubt about the feasibility of renewables. I mean, except for, there will be challenges. At the end of the day, when we're at renewable more than 80%, there will be challenges with balancing. But as of now, where our renewables are, we have a lot of social engineering that we have to do.
Right, thank you. So it's more a case of perception and how you cook the figures. One of the messages that we are hearing increasingly, we work with the World Economic Forum and others looking at grid infrastructure, and often one of the point has been raised that if we consider each country to be a closed system for electricity, you're constrained by the land area and you're constrained by the physical conditions of that country, and of course the day and night diurnal fluctuations in solar that occur. But if you open up thinking to a much broader grid, such as in Europe, and what we're increasingly seeing or seeing planned in the Asia Pacific around Thailand, Vietnam, etc., and Central America, that interconnectivity can also be a solution to some of these challenges, allowing renewables to be produced where they are, they're best to be produced and used where they're needed. I mean, the most audacious and ambitious of these plans is, of course, the Sun Cable project, which is seeking to build a cable from the Northern Territories across to Singapore, which will be a game changer if it happens. And do you see this sort of international cooperation? And again, a general question to the panel: do you see this international cooperation or regional cooperation idea being part of the solution?
Maybe I can take a crack at this one. Because we are present in so many markets around the world, we have direct experience on this, and it's called, these are called interconnectors, where you either direct current or AC lines that we connect markets. So we own either partially or fully interconnectors that connected Brazil, Argentina. There was also a line that went through Central America. We were also involved in a connector that connects Spain and Morocco. And then there were other various projects that we were involved in between Sicily, Italy, and maybe even going all the way up to North Africa. Now, our experience in this is very interesting because we go into these projects with the expectation that the energy is going to flow one direction. But in almost all these cases, once we built it, we learned that the energy actually flowed in the other direction. What I'm trying to say is that we cannot predict the future, but in all of these cases, having that flexibility, as you said, Sam, has provide benefit in all of these cases. So I completely agree with you that even in the Asia Pacific, even Korea, I mean, South Korea, in reality, unfortunately today, is an island. And I think all of these, pessimistic views about how it's going to be too costly to do renewables is probably based upon the fact that Korea is an isolated market. But I don't think Korea is going to be doomed to be isolated forever. In fact, I think there is, as you say, a lot of opportunities for us to be connecting further into the continent, but also probably connecting with Japan. And for the renewables industry, this is very critical, as you say, because the wind can stop blowing in one area, but it is blowing somewhere. And so to be able to have integrated grids allows for a lot of variation to be absorbed by that grid.
Great, thank you very much, Ju-Young Chung, and also to our other panelists, Melissa Hamilton, Daniel Kim, Gu-Young Chung, Gwang Ji-hyun, Ji-Young Hyun, and Ju-Jin Kim, for your fantastic presentations there. We've just about run out of time, but that's a really upbeat note to end on: international cooperation and South Korea not being an island and being part of that broader community is a really a virtual island, of course, but being part of that broader community, a really positive, upbeat message in the route to net zero. So thank you very much for your time and insight to our esteemed panel. And it's now it falls upon me to have the honour of closing this the overall session. This brings us to the close of the event, and we do hope you're all feeling inspired by the discussions that took place and more informed of the importance of setting and delivering net zero targets. So on behalf of the Climate Group, the Under2 Coalition and RE100, I'd like to extend my thanks to the Government of Cheongnam and Governor Yang Seung-jo for co-hosting this event, as well as to the Under2 Coalition co-chairs, Scotland, California, KwaZulu-Natal for their opening remarks, and to former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, for his inspiring keynote address. And finally, we heard from leading governments and businesses on their roads to net zero and the energy transition. Thank you to all the panelists for giving their time to take part and to share their stories and to share their expertise. Goodbye, everybody, and thank you for being part of today's event.
제가 이 자리를 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.